The wheel of time turns, and ages come and go, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The Wheel of Time turns and podcasts come and go. Welcome to WOTCast, a Wheel of Time book club. We are reading through Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series of that name and watching Amazon's upcoming Wheel of Time TV show. I am Caleb Wimble, and with me are Katie Jarvis, Dan Katinsky,
Hey everyone,
and Keely Frank.
Hello.
You can find us at WOTCast.net and support the show at patreon.com/WOTCast. Your support means a lot. Even $2 at the Two Rivers tier helps. To those of us who have joined us at the $5 Tarvalin tier, you will, by the time you hear this episode, be getting access to our first special bonus episode, where in this case we talk about Dune, Part 1, Denis Villeneuve's new adaptation of Dune, the history of the attempts to film it and the novel itself. And in the future we'll be talking about other things like Wheel of Time short stories, graphic novels, video games, failed TV pilots, and more. If you want to get access to that episode, you can do so now immediately by subscribing at the Tarvalin tier. It's a fun time. Email us questions, comments, and corrections via contact@wotcast.net with the subject line questions. We will answer them here on the show. For those unfamiliar, The Wheel of Time is an epic fantasy story about 5 small-town teens learning to be functional adults as they each enter their own magical puberty metaphors. Last time we talked about chapters 21 to 25 of the first book in the series, The Eye of the World. We saw the separated party fleeing Shadowspawn, finding refuge with the traveling folk, the Tinkers, also called the Tuatha'an, and attempting to find one another on the twisting road to Caemlyn, the capital of Andor. This episode, we're digging into chapters 26 to 30, where the chase picks up speed and enemies appear to be closing in on all sides. Keely, what happens in chapter 26, Whitebridge, loosely speaking?
Yeah, so the boat that they're on, the Spray, arrives in Whitebridge, which is named after the giant bridge that they talk about a lot, spanning through it. The Captain Bale tries to convince Thom that he should stay on because people will love a Gleeman wherever he goes. But Thom wants to take Rand and Mat Caemlyn and thinks that they'll probably help. And then they end up speaking an innkeeper. Can't read my thought down. And they learn that this false dragon Logain guy can apparently channel the One Power, or at least is saying that he can, but that supposedly he's been captured by the Aes Sedai. Thom kind of gives a little bit more context for himself, explaining that he had a nephew who was killed by Aes Sedai, and so that's why he's kind of like latched on to Rand and the others. Rand, they don't really talk about it that much, but Rand kind of assumes that there's probably only one reason that would happen. And then a Myrddraal shows up and attacks the three while they're in the streets, and Thom tells them basically like, run away, I'll handle this, and then supposedly Thom dies off screen.
Has his fly you fools moment on the bridge of Khazad Dûm here. Yeah, there's a lot of time spent describing this bridge from the Age of Legends. Although, weirdly enough, I feel like we get a much better description, to me, a much more evocative, short, and beautiful description of this place in a few chapters later from Nynaeve's perspective, which almost makes me wonder from a craft point if Jordan wrote that chapter first as the introduction to Whitebridge, and then he realized, oh no, wait, I want to write an earlier chapter from Rand and Mat's perspective coming in. So it's this one feels a little more functional to me and goes on for a good while. And it's a lot more of, learning what's going on in the wider world and things that we're not privy to. Like there's been this whole ongoing war we've been hearing about with this new self-proclaimed dragon, Logain, who's incapable of performing these incredible feats of power, but has now apparently been captured off screen. So I guess we'll find out what happens with him. If I'm going to guess from the trailers, we're going to be seeing a lot more of what's actually been going on with him rather than just hearing it secondhand on the TV show. Unless, I don't know if anybody else had that impression from the scenes we saw. What do we think about this chapter otherwise?
I felt this was really the first time that I fully understood that
Thom was kind of like not only protecting the kids, but going against the Aes Sedai and like sort of not. I don't think I understood until this point that he really was guiding them away from getting to Tar Valon. And really telling them to like fully disregard what the Aes Sedai had told them to do. So I thought that was interesting for me. I was like, oh, okay. And then we get some of the reason why.
Like he was the one who kept the boys from sharing their dreams with Moiraine before. Like he thought it would be really dangerous to tell her, right?
Yeah, so that was like a hint, but this was just more direct. And I was like, oh, okay, so he really doesn't want them to kind of get in the mix with the Aes Sedai. And I wonder, like, if everyone else fully understood what the reason would be that his cousin or
his nephew, I think, who seems kind of like an adoptive son to him almost.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I felt like, oh, it had to be that he was somehow channeling the one power and the Aes Sedai had to put a stop to him, or perhaps they tried to help him even and he put an end to himself. So I thought it was interesting that he has kind of a black and white telling of it, like that his nephew is the victim and the Aes Sedai are clearly the demonic force. And I feel like as the reader, I'm like, I'm not sure if that's exactly true.
He even leaves a little wiggle room in the telling, I think, because he sort of phrases it like they would not say they killed him, but he died because of them, kind of, or something like that, to that effect. Because we really don't know what the Aes Sedai do, or what the Red Aja specifically do with men who can channel, right? We just know that they take care of them, scare quotes, in some way or another.
Yeah, I'm not buying, I don't know, something about the way, I feel like characters have such strong emotions towards different concepts of the world in the book, but like, I'm not buying into it as a reader, so some of that's not resonating. And that was like with Perrin as well. It's like characters feel so strongly about Aes Sedai and like all these other things that I'm just like, not really seeing the connections there or the rationale. Like with Thom, they didn't really make that very explicit. And I feel like you think if they were traveling so long together, they would have like you think they would have like kind of picked up on that more, or like Thom would have seen more of her point of view, but like everyone's so hostile to her. But they've been traveling with her now for what seems like a little bit of time, but they still have like this really, like, they all recoil.
But she won't tell them what she's ultimately about, right? She's so cryptic about everything she's planning and her intentions for them. I mean, she's protected them. I feel like she's not given a whole lot of reasons to be very trusting of her beyond that, especially given what she's repeatedly emphasized she's willing to kill them if it keeps them away from the Dark One. It's
true. It's just like, I don't know, like the connection there just seems like hard for me to kind of like understand as the reader. I don't know if it's just so far removed from that scenario, but like that context makes sense. But we also know she's like helping them along, and as a reader, I have confidence in her. So it seems strange when everyone's like so against the Aes Sedai the whole time.
Is there any way in which that is colored by, we're coming to this book now with the context of the show and the trailers, despite it not being out yet, and the framing that we've talked about of Moiraine being the main character, and, knowing in hindsight that she has like a whole book dedicated to her? I guess it's impossible to know whether these things like sort of color our perception to her as probably ultimately on, a protagonist in a sense, and somebody who is out for good in one form or another. Whereas I'm trying to remember, but it's been too long since the first time I came to Wheel of Time, whether she seemed still more not worth trusting, and especially before we, like, at this point where we don't really understand the Aes Sedai or what the different Ajas are and everything. I don't know. It's one of those.
I don't know if it's that as much as like she plays into the trope of like the magical like wizard character coming in and helping. That it's such an established trope that I think that's more of the undoing is like the show. Like we're so used to like the protector coming in and knowing so much more about the world and educating like the teenagers about like it's such an established character trope, and it's always usually towards the positive. It's not usually this character that betrays them. So I think the trope is actually, or like the normal like their persona of this character is like kind of undoing that hesitation.
That's fair. You've got, of course, Gandalf as the most famous trope codifier like a Merlin, who Gandalf or Merlin can be an enormous asshole and not tell people things and use people as pawns in their plan, but they're still ultimately, they're going to be framed as on the right side of the conflict one way or another. Thom does point out, though, that Matt and Rand really have not thought through what it means to just walk into Tar Valon alone and hand themselves over to the Amyrlin seat, and the fact that they don't even know what the Ajas are or how to tell them from one another. So he's trying to convince them out of that. They get some coins back from Bail Doman, I guess, as a side note related to Moiraine, but they don't get the coin that Moiraine gave either of them among that. So we don't have that tracker. Anything else we should cover in this chapter before moving on?
I wrote down two things. One, I said Gelb is definitely going to be an issue. So he's the like deckhand or whatever that I think didn't Rand like land on him, and he was supposed to be keeping watch. The fact that they made such a big deal about his character, and then it's like, oh well, he just ran away when they told him like you don't have a job anymore. It's like, okay, he's gonna come back later and fuck everything up. And
he already started to at the end when he showed up again.
Yeah, and then so they talk about a crazy man, or like there's some kind of crazy dude in this in this chapter, and I just assumed that it was the Padden Fane guy again, because that's like the only character that they've described as like, oh, it was when they were asking the innkeeper or someone like who else has come through here, and he said some dude asking after the kids. I just assumed that that's him, because
who else would it be, right? Yeah.
Right, we have no other context, so I just kind of assume that it's him. And then I have a hard time believing that if Logain was actually captured, barely halfway through the first book, that it wasn't intentional, or that he doesn't have like something else going on, like, oh, here's a bajillion page series and this only real bad guy that you know about just happens to be captured. There wouldn't be a need for many more books beyond that if that was kind of end all. So I have a feeling that that was planned.
Did anyone else get, I agree with that. Did anyone else get like a little like, I don't know, the way Jordan writes, I get a little tired whenever he goes to a new location, because it's like so much description, like new characters introduced constantly. So when they got to Whitebridge, I was just like set up for another end scene. I'm like, this is gonna be like the 20th one we've had in this book already. So I'm happy there that they moved along quickly, but at the same time I feel like he spent so much time in descriptions that like when they finally get to like that big reveal at the end where he gets stabbed, I don't know, like these like Nazgul like creatures, the Myrddraal or whatever, I'm not sure, like, did they know that it was like, were they going to actually come up to them? Like, why did they have to expose themselves in the crowd? I don't think I get that scene. Like,
it was closing in on them. They couldn't get away from it. It was.
But how does it know? Is it like this magical sense that we haven't really been told as a reader? Or like, is it because like the dream connection? Like, how do these Myrddraal know? Like, they just kind of gravitate towards them, and is it because of like their energy they're producing or something?
We've had Lan say something like they can taste or smell where their prey are that they're tracking, which is very Nazgul. Like, again, the Nazgul they left this out in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, but kept it in Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, that the Nazgul are sniffing all the time and like getting down on all fours and like smelling the ground and then tasting the air and all. They're just Myrddraal are doing exactly the same thing as far as I can tell from what Lan said, that once they know what you taste like, they can nearby keep honing in on you on the wind, something like that.
But how did they know?
Yeah.
Like, did Logain or whoever is this massive power, did he like take a piece of Rand's shirt in a dream and then like give it to, like, how did they know? Oh,
they've met this Myrddraal before in the inn in Berlin. It disappeared into the shadows when.
Is this the same one though? Because they keep saying Myrddraal are stationed at every city. Like, how is this one like always like right where they're at? Like, I'm always like wondering if there's like a spy amongst their midst, amongst the boys, if it's like the dream connection. Because I'm like, these guys are literally, and even Matt's like on edge in the alleyway because he's like feeling like no matter where they look, they're constantly being like honed in. And the villain's feeling a little OP right now. I'm like, is there no constraint in terms of like how this villain or antagonist gets around and finds them so quickly where no matter where they are?
Mm-hmm. And can see through, as we're seeing more of in these chapters, all sorts of different animals, and just like basically has this vast mind network all over the place between human dark friends, animals that serve the Dark One, Myrddraal who have all these powers and can slink around in the like teleport between shadows seemingly. They can just move from one to another. Yeah, it is, and it's interesting you say OP, because at the same time, I have felt in earlier chapters like we were killing Charlocks almost too easily and too readily when they showed up, to where it was starting to undermine their threat a bit, that even these kids who have no idea how to fight like can sort of accidentally lop their way through a few of them in these battles a lot of the time, and then you just have to slaughter loads of them, and of course it leads up to the Myrddraal being way more powerful. But Lan's already beheaded one of those, right? And he's like, oh, we still have to run. It takes them a whole day to die after you cut their head off. So we need to get out of here. It's going to keep fighting and killing. But yeah, maybe they share information or have some way of like that the Myrddraal all telepathically communicate. I'm actually not sure at this point. I've forgotten the mechanics. And we still haven't met the Draghkar, right? Who's been flying around, stalking them up in the clouds at night. So, well, I guess, Dan, do you want to tell us what happens in chapter 27, Shelter from the Storm?
Sure. So Egwene dances with the Tuathon. Is that how you pronounce it? I wasn't here for the last time with the discussion of the how you pronounce
Something like that, yeah.
The,
I think we're just all butchering our way through it.
Yeah, the people of the leaf. And then Perrin has this dream of Beelzemon and the wolves, where Beelzemon visits him, and he hasn't been having visitations from Beelzemon because of the wolves recently, but it seems like whatever barrier was there because of the wolves now being torn down. And the wolves are murdered in this dream, and it's like this agonizing experience for him. He awakes, and then Elias, who up to this point has been telling him he has a hunch or something that is keeping him from wanting to leave this camp, finally decides it's time to leave, and they depart the Tinkers after a pretty long farewell to the villagers.
In the chapters that we read this week, I was really enjoying the Perrin sections for some reason. I was trying to put my finger on why. I'm not really sure. It's not like I'm so particularly drawn to Perrin's point of view, but I don't know. I just felt like they read a little more easily. There was more interesting components, and I would kind of be like, oh, I'm excited when another one comes along. So I thought that was interesting. I also noticed in this section, I think Caleb had pointed out last week that they're always thinking that another one of their friends is better with girls. And so in this one, Perrin's like, oh, Rand would have known what to do. I just thought that was funny. But I was like, okay, this section, it was a shorter chapter, but it read really fast to me. And I was kind of interested in this world that they're in, and maybe it's the wolves, or I'm not sure what it is, but I was liking the Perrin chapters this week. Did anyone else feel that way?
Definitely more than the last set for me. I thought this was a really, maybe partly there's so much going on, but yeah, the world building too, like you say, and finding out about the Wolf Brother stuff and all that in the pack. It's an interesting, and feels like we're doing more emotional character development in this, like the getting to know the Tuathon so briefly, and then still having this very meaningful farewell. And Elias, despite that we've only known him a couple chapters, I feel like we know much more about him emotionally than we do like Land, for instance, who is all stoic and I'm just the silent defender here type thing. But feeling more, I've compared them to the split halves of Strider and Aragorn. But I really like the Elias encounters throughout here too, as abrasive and prickly as he is. I think he's an interesting. Well, yeah, it's just an interesting part of the journey. I agree.
Did anyone think it was odd that his character, who is so abrasive and hates, at least it seemed pretty obviously established by himself in the prior chapters that he doesn't like people being around other people. He likes being like almost a nomadic, like solo adventurer. Suddenly wants to stay in this camp, and like I don't know. I found that frustrating. It's like Perrin wants to leave, and this guy's like, let's sit around. He's all happy, and I get there's like some kind of magic at work that's pulling both him and Egwene to stay and be part of the camp. I'm like, they constantly seem to be staying a lot longer in locations than they should, and Perrin seemed to be the only one that had a problem with that. And I'm like, you guys are all like, your friends are like potentially dead, you're being chased by these Trollocs, but then there always seems to be these lulls in their adventure where they just like chill in a place for a while. And to me, it's getting frustrating. I'm like, this is like a cyclical pattern with like the pacing of the story, and I'm like, you keep taking breaks and it somehow is allowed, and then you wait till the last moment when you have to, it's like almost a procrastination on a college assignment, because it's like they keep repeating that cycle of like waiting till the last minute to do something, and then they have to like scurry out because like their dreams are getting like burned or something. Like they never take advantage of any of the lulls they have.
Yeah, I wrote down like my first note for this chapter is it seems counterintuitive with a group that makes so much noise. Like that you're traveling with them when you're trying, like the whole build up was like, oh, you have to be quiet, we have to zigzag through the woods, don't step on a freaking leaf because they're gonna hear you. And then now it's just like, oh, he said it's rare to see someone not playing an instrument or not singing, and then they have this whole like freaking weird dance scene. And so that made me wonder, like, is that just a total oversight by Jordan, or is he implying that like this group of people are so the outsider that even like the most evil being in the universe wouldn't think to look at them to find who they're looking for? Like, are they hiding in plain sight, or are they being followed? Like, it just, I don't know.
We just established that they couldn't, because the Myrddraal finds them in the city even though they've given no indication that they're there. So it's like 1 minute this thing gravitates toward them even though they just literally got into disguises. And the next minute they're with this traveling group. To your point, Keely's like, they're playing music. They literally have like red wagons and like really brightly lit decorations and all that. Like
Yeah,
they
are
use that in the
conspicuous.
description. Yeah, so it's like they're almost like these nomadic like musicians, and then they're so loud, and yet they decide to camp with them for several days. So I don't know. All of this seems a little counterintuitive to like, and almost to the power structures you're defining, Caleb. He never seems to know if he wants to tell this like really quick pacing of like them fleeing this like really terrible enemy, or if the enemy is not that bad and they can kind of lull and have like down moments. It's like, I don't know.
Well, I have a couple thoughts on it. The first is that just that one, that's the genre, right? That's high fantasy. That's like that. These are the tropes established in questing stories since long before Tolkien even. This is the way that the fantasy travelogue goes. Even when you're fleeing from some great evil or towards when you find these places of refuge along the way. And the question is whether it turns out to be a true place of refuge or if it's a place where evil is lurking behind the corner. And you know, is this, you think of like even all the way back to the journey of Odysseus, like a lot of the refuges that it comes into come with a huge catch where there's refuge among the lotus eaters, but you're going to lose your mind to the bliss and pleasures here. Or there's refuge with what's her name, the enchantress who takes him in, but also then she sort of makes Odysseus her sex slave for a long time there. Or they find refuge on that island that turns out to have a cyclops, and they have to find a way to escape and get on to the next part. And all of Lord of the Rings is that, of course, the going between. I mean, I totally fine taste-wise not to like it and to find that it's not quite working in this passage. The only thing I would push back against or confirm is that I think it has to be very intentional, very, very deliberate that the Tuathon are so conspicuous. Like it's pointed out so many times, they wear the loudest clothing possible. They dance like nonstop. They sing and make all this noise. Like you pointed out, Keely, there's the mentions that both Elias and is it Perrin or Egwene who feels like that there's some reason they should stay with them, like something protective. So I do wonder if it is there's a couple different real world mythical traditions where you have these figures who are like laid bare to the gods or to the world of magic or whatever. They dress in like a really like a conspicuous way. They show themselves and they make all this noise in a way that like maybe lets them hide in plain sight. And where the evil eye can't follow them. That's kind of what I interpret is sort of going on here, but it sure does feel convenient, like you said, Dan. Yeah. It sure does feel like there's a narrative convenience to, well, there's just a magical reason we can rest here for now, so it's in safety, so we get to know who these folks are.
I felt like the continuous reminder of like, we'll know when we have to leave, and like I'm trying to keep sensing for it that we sort of get from Elias. That was like maybe Jordan trying to deal with that fact, like, yeah, guys, I know, like that we're loud here and we're not really hiding and we're kind of having a good time. So I sort of felt like that repetition was a little bit him addressing that. I also had to bring up the ending of the section back to our gender issues where Egwene is talking with Ela and Perrin's like, what are you guys always talking about? And he says, advice, nobody tells us how to be men. We just are. And
Egwene says Ela was giving her advice on being a woman. Right?
I'm being a woman. And he's like, why do you need that? And then she says, that's probably why you make such a bad job of it. I'm like, yeah, okay. I feel like we kept getting these little funny little like snippets of dialogue or sections where it's just kind of like, okay, here we are again.
Yeah, that and like, the comments on like womanhood and all that and the gender politics. And also, did anyone pick up on, I think it was in this chapter, he literally almost like makes a comment, like an introspective comment about like he writes all these innkeepers and then he's also very mean to them about being like fat and losing their hair was like literally the description for it. I was like, okay, okay, like do you really have to? Like it's like Bran thinking he's like wondering if every innkeeper is like fat and balding. And it's like it's such a harsh description. I'm just like, okay, like this is kind of terrible, but I guess this is how Jordan's gonna write every single innkeeper, and he's gonna like really make a comment on their weight too. Like it just seemed really mean.
Yeah, it seems we're still so far embedded in those even like Elizabethan era tropes, like in Shakespeare, where the like fat people are stumbling and incompetent or something like that. And we also get the other Shakespeare stereotype in one of these later chapters where being too thin and gaunt looking is a sign of another kind of like that's more rapacious evil. And Jan Cassius has a lean and hungry look about him. We will be shortly introduced to the Lord Whitecloak Bornhold, or the Lord Commander Bornhold, with a description that felt straight out of Julius Caesar in that sense. So yeah, lots of that, more stuff about like people's appearances being tied to intrinsic personality qualities about them in a way people have been doing since time immemorial. Katie, do you want to summarize what happens in chapter 28, Footprints in Air?
Sure. So in this chapter, Nynaeve, Moiraine, and Lan arrive in Whitebridge, just missing their companions, and they learn of the Myrddraal. Lan tries to send Nynaeve home before she gets hurt. Nynaeve refuses, which I did think was a touch confusing because we had gotten the previous information that Nynaeve really needed to make it to Tarvalon in order to, not be killed by the one power that is potentially brewing inside of her.
Oh, that's Egwene. We learned Nynaeve is actually one of the rare ones who figured out how to be safe with it. She has like a measure of control.
Okay, so since she has that, it's kind of fine, and she doesn't necessarily have to make the journey. I guess I maybe didn't quite understand that.
Well, Moiraine certainly indicates that she's going to make sure Nynaeve makes that journey one way or another. But yeah, it's that was, I think, that first chapter we got from Nynaeve's perspective. Moiraine sort of explained to her, you have figured out a way to control and keep yourself safe from the power and use it in limited wisdom-like ways to hear the wind. But and so Nynaeve is like, well, I'll just do the same for Egwene. It's fine. And Moraine's like, no, she's definitely going to die. That's like almost nobody can do that. And if you don't let me get her there, she will die of this one power burnout, this fever that happens.
So it's kind of just like a slight tension between Lan and Moiraine on that, like on Nynaeve's. It's not a contradiction, maybe just a little tension. Let's see what else happens. Well, Moiraine hints that she's going to take Nynaeve to the White Tower, whether she wants to go or not. Yeah, I think that this chapter, I was still a little bit irritated by Nynaeve's sort of just dislike for the companions she's traveling with. But I guess that's her opinion, and she's entitled to it.
She feels very strongly that the power was a filthy thing we get in her internal monologue. She would have nothing to do with it unless she had to, which she is a person of interesting contrast, I'm finding here. And she is, she's often at war with her own wants, like her, these conflicting things that she wants to achieve, her goals, her sense of duty. She's principled, but I think in some ways her morality is shown to be as utilitarian as Moraine's, kind of ironically, like that Nynaeve is often hating Moiraine for thinking and saying things that Nynaeve herself sort of thinks in the exact same way and makes her plans in the same way.
Yeah, like, is it in this chapter that Nynaeve thinks to herself, like, well, I don't want to do this, but I'll go to Tarvalon if it means I can learn how to kill you or something? Like, I remember that happening in one of the chapters, and I was like, okay, that's convenient for you.
We do find out that you, Moiraine, talking to Nynaeve, can do nothing with the one power when emotion rules your mind. So she's supposed to learn how to quiet her mind and control her temper at Tarvalon. We do get some interesting line of thought from here from Nynaeve, if only there was some way to get rid of the woman, meaning Moiraine, Lan would be better by himself. A warder should be able to handle what was needed, she told herself hastily, feeling a sudden flush. No other reason, but one meant the other. And yet, Lan made her even more furious than Moiraine. She could not understand how he managed to get under her skin so easily. He rarely said anything, blah, blah, blah. If it was a duel, she had not managed to score once, and Moiraine did not even seem to realize she was in a fight. So we're certainly getting some hints of the way that Nynaeve is feeling about Lan at some level.
They've had an interesting little back and forth with the whole, they spent the interaction, both of them, about the tracking, I think first. She constantly was like, oh yeah, she was proud of the fact he had trouble noticing the tracks or that she could follow them in the place. Sort of complimented her there, or at least surprised. And then later too, when he didn't sense her right away, and Moiraine was the one who kind of spotted her when she was eavesdropping. She was proud of that. And then she was also hoping he had trouble finding her horse when he was fetching it, because she's I hid my horse really well. So it's this constant trying to get one up him in terms of her skill set, and I don't know, proving herself with Lan. But she's always she has this low-key competition with him, and then this hatred for Moiraine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry to constantly be comparing everything in the world to Lord of the Rings, apparently the only book or movie I've ever read or seen. But I am getting those like friendly the Gimli and Legolas vibes of their constant like initially subtle, and then by the second movie just like allowed, like they're competing with each other in their display of martial skills and arts and everything, which for them is played up as bromance. But I think here we're getting more hints that Nynaeve feels a certain way about Lan. That puts this in the context of maybe kind of a flirtatious banter, even if she doesn't verbalize that entirely. And again, we get her descriptions of the bridge here, which I thought were this gave me a much better and more evocative picture of the White Bridge, the actual structure. And this is me getting into the writerly thing again, where she's talking about if lace was made of glass, it would look like this, and describing the slick surface and the way it looks like it's going to collapse in on itself at any time. I got a much more vivid picture of the whole city here from Nynaeve's perspective. Even when she talks about like walking around the piles of blackened timbers, the men in poorly fitting red uniforms and tarnished armor patrolled the streets, but they marched quickly as if afraid of finding anything. It just seemed like a much better written chapter than the last introduction to White Bridge to me, getting it from her perspective. We see Moiraine showing sympathy to these people, and to Nynaeve's surprise, it appeared genuine. So maybe Moiraine is not quite as hard as and unfeeling as Nynaeve has believed. Everybody's reticent to talk about what went down, and they blame some of it on that maybe there was a man in town using the One Power. It was time to have the Aes Sedai in, let the Red Ajah settle matters. Anything else we need to get to in this chapter?
Was it in this chapter where someone was talking about like, well, what about my friends? Or like they bring up Egwene and Moraine's like, meh. Like was it this? I wrote down Moiraine as being weird about Egwene, but I didn't give myself any context. And so I think that's what I was referring to.
The last page, is that what you're talking about? The I want to find the boys too, Nynaeve said, but what about Egwene? That conversation?
That must be it then. Because it's the last thing I wrote, but I didn't give myself why I wrote that. But that's probably it, that she like is writing her off, or at least that's how it feels.
I wasn't sure how to read this because Moiraine sort of seems like suddenly angry, like her eyes are almost glowing for a moment at the mention of Egwene, and her back stiffened, and that's Nynaeve. Nynaeve feeling that anger, and and Moiraine is cold again. Okay, that makes more sense. I hope to find Egwene alive and well too. I do not easily give up on young women with that much ability once I have found them, but it will be as the wheel weaves. Yeah, it did seem like she is kind of like doing that triage thing she always does and deciding that Egwene is a lower priority than the other two boys that she's currently able to track, maybe.
So maybe they'll talk about this more, but like, how much influence do they have over this the concept of the wheel? Because, Moiraine is always like, oh, well, if it happens, it fucking happens. But like, she's making deliberate choices. So either she knows what's supposed to happen until like the end of time, or she's just like, meh, fuck it. And so it feels like, until I guess I have a firm understanding of that it feels kind of like lazy to me, where like, I even got that with Elias, where he was like, well, we'll leave when we leave. Like, what happens will happen. And so it's like, are they playing into something they know, and they're just not really explaining how they know? Or like, what is that?
It definitely feels like a lottery system. Sometimes it's like, it's what the wheels already like set in motion and everything, and then other moments very executive decisions made. So just like, sometimes I'm like, well, it's already like written in stone or whatever. It's like, what's happened has happened. And they almost, was it Lan questioning about that too? Like, there's a couple of characters who are like, is this written already, or is this like kind of set in motion? So it's like they question it, but there doesn't somehow, to your point, Keely, it's like some characters seem to know the flow and like accept it, and other things are changeable, but it doesn't really say a line.
Moiraine sort of has a line that seems to indicate that she can see to some limited extent, or she says something like, and I don't have the quote in front of me, something like, even I can only see the potential weaves coming out of the pattern, and once they are woven, that sort of thing. That's kind of the impression I get, that she hints at being able to see potential futures in some limited way, and almost like she's like pooling on different threads trying to make certain things happen. But once that thread is woven into the pattern, whether that's literal, or like a metaphor for whatever is going on with the Wheel of Time, which we still don't know if that is literal or metaphorical. That once it has happened, that it can't be changed, and then she just like fully accepts things and moves along. But I do think we've gotten a couple hints that she is capable in some way of manipulating or attempting to manipulate in the future which paths things go down.
I I was getting a Dune-like sense there. Like it seems like a more, it's like a more metaphorical way to speak about what like Paul Atreides' visions sort of show him, in that he can't necessarily see exactly what's going to happen, and he can't necessarily change it, but he does get some kind of insight that guides him, and it sort of feels like that to me.
And that by even, the inevitable can see the future thing, where by doing something to change it or affect it, you are putting yourself in the pattern, and that's changing the way things go. So you've changed the vision that you had in the first place, or what the future might have been if you didn't interact. Yeah, real tangled. But I don't think, we still don't know very much at this point about how any of that works in a metaphysical sense in this world.
Yeah, so to me, I guess I'm like fighting with like, okay, so is she kind of like a Doctor Strange character where like she knows how it's supposed to go? Or is this like the timekeepers and they're, like bigger forces are constantly trying to prevent certain things from happening? Or is it just that like she's kind of psychic? And so like you said, like without trying to influence things, if she knows what's happening, things are going to get influenced.
Well, we move beyond Moiraine's sight for the moment into Chapter 9, Eyes Without Pity. Elia sneaks Perrin and Egwene across these long, rolling, hilly grasslands where they barely avoid notice by a truly massive flock of ravens, which at one point we see very grisly end that they bring to a poor fox who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They just sort of peck and eat him alive in a matter of minutes. Perrin is finding that he can hear and feel the wolves even at a distance. The trio find running from they're at first sneaking, and then at the last minute like breaking, running when they have to cross a hill to get away from these swarms of ravens into a shelter of sorts, a steading. They like cross this line, and suddenly the ravens cannot follow. It's a place where the one power cannot touch, and where the Shadow's creatures fear to come. And Egwene feels a sudden sense of loss of something as they enter into it. And even Perrin feels that something is different, and this chill that he experiences as passing into it. So, once again, Fellowship of the Ring thing. We have Saruman's swarms of crows sublimated into here a swarm of ravens from which the party must hide. But here, they're not just like out spying. They're also capable of tearing you to pieces if they happen down to you, like the 1,000-some ravens described in here. Mostly an action scene. What'd y'all think?
Yeah, I really like this one. I like the idea of them like not thinking to look up. Like Elias like was hiding from something, looking for something, but he didn't know what. And then you realize it's these like groups of birds communicating and working as like an army. I thought that was really cool. We'll definitely say though, like massive trigger warning for this chapter that there's really graphic described animal violence, like death against animals, which that shit's like really upsetting to me. Like I work in a really dark field. I see and hear about a lot of dark shit all the time. Animal stuff can't do. So this part was like probably the most upsetting, that like the gore with animals and all that. Like it was cool to the concept of, let's think about like monster movies, right? Like the concept of that as a movie, like, the movie The Birds and all that is really interesting, but I don't want to see it.
That's fair. That's a good reminder to me that I should put that warning on for this episode at the top or in the show notes. Dan is going to step off for a moment, and we'll wrap up this set of chapters here. Katie and Keely, any other thoughts on it? Again, it's like we get the gruesomeness that you just described, Keely. We get a fear is the mind killer type line, or at least it's fear will kill you if you don't control it, from Elias to Perrin. Oh God, yeah. I highlighted a few of the particularly nasty descriptions of the ravens. There's a line about them seething like maggots on the hill at one point. Yeah. This is maybe the most gruesome chapter we've had in terms of the graphic nature of the violence here, and how dark things get. We get Perrin struggling a lot with the wolf thing and how he feels it's like this curse, that he feels like he's tainted maybe by the Dark One's taint. He says the light blind me, cursed with this thing, like sort of conceptualizing it in this like dirty kind of folklore way. I feel like the way that werewolves or vampires were traditionally thought of, and being this like unholy creature doing something wrong with animals, but as everybody has pointed out on the show at one point or another, this version of it, like he's not like literally, Elias is not literally, he's a werewolf in the mythological sense, but he's not literally turning into like a monstrous, uncontrollable wolf. He's a dude who has like a lot of wolf-like qualities and can communicate with them, which is kind of just way cooler in a lot of ways, and he has a lot of control over it. So it's hard to like really now in a modern mindset to feel like, God, Perrin, what's your problem? This is an awesome ability, like folks have said. It's not like, but he has this very deeply kind of almost religious sense of uncleanness to the whole thing, and the aversion that he feels to it. He feels like almost violated by this thing that's happening to him.
I thought it was interesting how he feels like Egwene maybe, I can't remember if it's this chapter or the following chapter, but he kind of talks about how like, will Egwene judge him, or does she even know him anymore now that he has this wolf connection, which I thought was interesting because Perrin is aware of Egwene's connection to the One Power, right?
Yeah. He is. Yeah.
So I'm like, well, come on now. You guys have all got these like weird things going on. I mean, I know there was like the scenes of Rand eavesdropping. So maybe Perrin is less aware, but I thought he was still aware.
Oh, right. Because of the fire scene. Yes. He caught her. Starting a fire with the power, or trying to.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was wondering why he would feel like so judged by him, but I guess it's like a whole identity crisis thing going on for him. So we just have to kind of take it as this, you know, he thought he was one thing and now he is something else. And that can always be a difficult transition. And also, was it in this section where he has the kind of weird, debate in his mind about whether or not he would be able to like use his axe on Egwene if he needed to, because the crows were going to get her. And I just thought that was strange. That
was jarring.
Yeah. I was like, why are you even going there in your mind? But
it felt like an intrusive thought to me almost for him as well. And then the way that because at some point Elias senses that he's having that thought or feeling too. But it was disturbing. You know, you're suddenly like, it's like, whoa, suddenly you're jumping very quickly to having to kill your friend here that you grew up with.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, like, is that one of those thoughts where, you know, you're walking down the street and out of nowhere your brain's like, you should kick that toddler into traffic? Like, you know, is it one of those, or was it supposed to be more of the kind of like the pack mentality that like you take down like the weakest link to keep the pack going? Like, I don't know if that's kind of what it was, or if it was just supposed to be like a pretty in our face way of showing that like Perrin is changing.
Maybe both. Yeah, I mean, I made like a one-off joke at the beginning in the summary, but I think this set of chapters, it's become clear. I have been conceptualizing what's going on in a way that did not occur to me as a child, because I had not gone through adolescence yet when I started reading these books, that the extent to which these teens, though they're much older than adolescents, are each changing they're in a mental and physical way that is confusing and fearful and frightening to them, in a way that I'm really reading as like this sort of second puberty metaphor this time around, for the way that they're each going through it, and each of them are changing in their own way, but and they know that the others are changing, but they still feel so private in their embarrassment and the way that they feel dirty about what's happening to them, especially Perrin, or sick, like in the way that, you know, Matt, or they're having all these physical things, like Rand is getting these fever chills and being taken over by whatever this personality is. Matt is becoming sullen and the teenager that is like all dark and edgelordy and grim suddenly. I don't know, that metaphor is coming across to me much, much more strongly on this read. It something, there's a lot of supernatural stories in that vein, like something like Stephen King's Carrie, where, you know, like the experience of, and that's a lot, and I know, sorry, Keely, I know you really have a lot of distaste for Stephen King, but across, like, I feel like monster fiction too, and fantasy fiction, there's a mix of either becoming a monster as a metaphor for adolescence, or gaining some sort of magical power, or both in some way, which is happening to sort of all these characters here in a sense. I don't know. Am I reading too much into it? If I read this one too many times, or is that it's something anyone else picked up on? Just me, I guess.
No, I think you're on track there. That makes sense to me. And especially I feel like you're probably getting even like a deeper dive into it, because you can kind of compare it to the first time you read it, which is always a cool thing to be able to do.
We need to wrap up pretty soon here, but getting through this chapter, we get a lot more, once again, more lore information. We find in this setting like a remnant of the kingdom of Arthur Hawkwing, I've read the pronunciation Arthur Hawking before too, who is, this is, I think, the first point when I was reading the novel the first time that it clicked for me, besides like the obvious sort of Adam and Eve thing that we have described and with Satan and all that about, the beginning in a prior age and letting the Dark One into the world. We get here a deliberate reference to real world mythology as having something literal in this world. This is Arthur Pendrag, which is that's Arthur Pendragon, the King Arthur of Arthurian legend in Cymric history, and like all the Arthurian legends we pass down the day. It's a totally different version of him here, but he's sort of doing the same thing as the High King who united all these lands in like 800 years ago or whenever this was, from the Great Blight to the Sea of Storms, from the Aryth Ocean to the Aiel Waste, and then set about to build his own Camelot, like this perfect city that he was going to build on a steading of peace where neither the Shadow nor the One Power could enter, because he also was like waged a massive war against the Aes Sedai. There's going to be a new city, not connected in any man's mind with any old cause or factional rivalry, a city of brotherliness, essentially, which is, the Camelot dream in the Arthur myths, which take a new form here, which I think this was maybe the point where it was meant to be, okay, there's something going on with the cycles here and something about like the way that these things are playing out in parallel to our own maybe not real history, but our mythic history and our religious history playing out in a parallel way here. We get reference to a 20-year siege of Tar Valon when like the Aes Sedai were all like holed up inside the tower before Arthur Hawking died, because he died of something the Aes Sedai easily could have cured, but he was not really into that and viciously opposed to them. And we get our last chapter 30, Children of Shadow, which, Keely, do you want to wrap us up on that one real quick?
Yeah, sure. So they're in the setting. All of a sudden, riders kind of show up, and they talk about them as finally being the Whitecloaks again, that they're trying to like sneak around. They spot Perrin, like him and Egwene had run away and tried to hide, and Elias stayed away with wolves. They spot Perrin then, and he starts to feel the emotions of one of the wolves that's trying to defend them. And then Perrin ends up, he either gets like hit in the head or he passes out. I don't know if I think it says like he doesn't know if he actually got hit or if he's feeling the wolf get hit. When he wakes up, they are in a tent and realize that they're a prisoner of the Whitecloak. Elias has escaped. They don't know where he is. There, Perrin and Egwene are interrogated by Captain Bornhold, who declares Perrin is going to be executed for killing some of the Whitecloaks.
And Katie, I think you need to run at this point. So we'll say farewell and catch you next time. Where can people find you on the internet, since I forgot to ask Dan before he was popping off?
You can find me at katiejarvis.com or on Instagram at 30inLA, and I'll see you guys next time.
See you, Katie. And you can find Dan at Pansy Dan, spelled with a Z-Y, so P-A-N-Z-Y, Dan, at Twitter and Instagram. So Keely and I will wrap this up together. As you said, Keely, this is where we're getting the Whitecloaks back into the story in a much bigger way, and capture and interrogation by, we have kind of the hot-headed young, like zealotous and kind of frankly kind of stupid younger Whitecloak, who is then butting up against the very, I found kind of like well conveyed, intimidating Lord Captain Bornhold, who both seems. He has like a kind, like he's got obviously experience, and he has a realism about things and like a savviness about what actually went on here, despite all of the younger ones. Like, he's like bring all these exaggerations. We were beset by 50 wolves and dozens of men and all that. And Bornhold's like, no, I think this is how it went down. I think you're new to this, and I understand how easy it is to get mixed up in the dark outside the city. But this was nothing quite that big. And he sort of pieces parts of the truth out from Egwene and from Perrin. But yeah, I found him like an immediately kind of compelling villain, I would say, is the way he feels like he's introduced here. We're definitely we get the sense from Elias and Perrin that you hinted at, that they smell a wrongness to the Whitecloaks, that they smell kind of like rabid dogs, as the wolves put it, which is apparently wolves can sense religious zealotry and fundamentalism just like dogs do, of course. That's definitely a real thing. But these fantasy wolves have some other abilities here.
So I was wondering with that, because the only other being that they've really said the wolves have an opinion on are Trollope and the bad guys. So I was wondering if it was foreshadowing that the wolves don't trust guys. Something is weird. And is it because they're tainted? Their whole thing is that they go against the Dark One, but is that not entirely true? And I kind of get that vibe with Bornhald, who I did really like. I like that they kept describing him almost as a grandfather character. But he also, I felt really anxious reading the whole section where he's basically summarizing Perrin's fake story and pointing out every way that what he says further supports that he is a dark friend. And that made me feel so anxious. Nothing you say will be taken as proof that you're not a dark friend, because he's just going to twist it. You're screwed. And so I felt so anxious for them, but that also kind of plays into how much power this guy has and how intimidating he is.
It's almost a bit like the God. It sounds like I have 3 points of nerd reference on this show, but the Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin scene in Star Wars, where he's interrogating Princess Leia and getting the location of Dantooine before blowing up, and he has that sort of genial grandfatherly vibe, while also that deep menace behind all of it, that he can just casually turn around and order, in Tarkin's case, a mass murder at the end of it, and in this case at the end, just casually, oh yeah, Perrin's going to be executed and strung up for the whole city of Camelin to see what happens to dark friends, though he still seems to hold out hope for Egwene being purified of her connection to the dark.
Which I didn't like at all. I didn't like that he focused on her. I know there's only 2 of them, but I was also oh God, what does that mean? What are they going to do to this poor girl? But I really like the dynamic between him and he kept a child buyer?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, his dynamic where clearly he's just the muscle. And he would the buyer would try to speak up and then immediately be oh shit, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have talked.
Yep.
And he'd be oh, you silly child. You think that's what happened. You're not a thief, are you? So I kind of like that dynamic of constantly putting people in their place, even in front of who are basically prisoners. I thought was really fun.
Yeah. It's the it's the good cop, bad cop routine with the two of them, except it's the young, dumb, hot-headed cop and the really chilling, experienced commissioner here, or something, who knows his way about this. And I'm not surprised we're maybe picking up some creepy gender-related vibes from the all-male, religiously fundamentalist paramilitary organization here, potentially. So that's disconcerting. A lot of vibes of I've probably referenced the Crucible before, but certainly a lot of they feel like a bunch of the villagers in that one. The way, maybe even the way they address each other as child and brother and everything too. It's that sense. Yep. Here come the witch hunters. Here come the Inquisitors, who are probably going to burn you at the stake, whether you are or not. Whatever that means. Because I think we get seen very clearly here. They do not really differentiate between Aes Sedai and Shadow Spawn and Dark Friends. It's just all, he's listing off the 1, 2, 3, the points he's making about the Perrin's connections to that Perrin has just admitted to the wolves, who they also think of as being some of the Dark One's creatures, which, to be fair, it's a little confusing keeping track about which animals are supposed to be evil in this world, which scavengers and which ones are viciously opposed to the Dark One. So I'll concede them on that one, not knowing the difference between ravens and wolves. Something I highlighted before all this went down, when they were still with Elias in this chapter, was about Perrin's axe and Perrin's the feelings he's having about violence and about the axe itself, and he wants to get rid of it because he's feeling these urges towards these violent impulses that really sicken him, and he's also becoming maybe more wolf predator But Elias catches his wrist as Perrin's about to throw the axe in a pool, and he says, "You'll use it, boy, as long as you hate using it. You will use it more wisely than most men would. Wait, if you ever don't hate it any longer, that will be the time to throw it as far as you can and run the other way." And maybe this is not the most unique conversation in the history of high fantasy, it's an interesting conversation in light of, I feel like, the way that we've already kind of had the sword, the that Rand has like fetishized a little bit in its meaning from his father, but in the way that fantasy sort of fetishizes weapons generally and and literally like as a fetish as having this like sacred power. But this had me thinking a lot about our culture today, and of course we live in America, so I'm thinking about gun culture and to some extent sword culture, and the passionate hobbyist way in which a lot of Americans think of weapons and collect truly devastatingly deadly weapons in a way that is like giddy and fun, and that's like the whole point of them, and going down to and the freedom to do whatever you want with them from your backyard. And I don't want to say that's all weapon owners. I think that I've certainly known plenty who they take them very seriously, or they think of like this gun is for hunting exclusively and needs to be very carefully locked up. It's not a toy. It's not meant to be fawned over in this way. But I don't know. This passage certainly had me reading as this very different take from the way that weapons are often fetishized in American culture, and the notion that the moment you find yourself liking them, that you're talking about yourself as like a gun hobbyist, that's maybe the time where it should be worrying about your relationship with them, maybe.
Yeah, I kind of got the same vibe. I was thinking more of like people that I knew in high school that like all they wanted was to like join the military or law enforcement or whatever. And then now like I know people that are veterans and that have experienced these horrific things, and that it's kind of like that, very in your face example of, I think is it from like World War I or something, where it's the picture of the guy that's shell shocked. And it's just like, once you start using it, if you find that you're enjoying what you're doing, you need to get away, because like the people that actually have to use it and see horrific thing, it changes you, and not in a good way. So like basically like the whole idea of like getting PTSD versus getting enjoyment out of it, and that's kind of what I was taking from what Elias was saying, that like it's still kind of like you can tell that he was influenced by the traveler group, that he clearly had some relationship to them. He's not necessarily like promoting or condoning violence, but acknowledging that sometimes you have to do it. But if you're, coming up on the side where this is fun for you and a game, then you're probably on the wrong side. And
those are probably the people you need to watch out for, right? Most of the ones who, like you say, are like trying to, who dream of joining the police so for the purpose of being allowed to exercise deadly violence and having the right to do it freely. It's I realized we glossed over the Elias thing you just brought up when there's kind of an interesting moment in that chapter where they're saying goodbye to Tuatha, and he surprises them all, shocks them all really by doing like their religious liturgy about finding the song and giving this like farewell that he will keep looking for it for them. So yeah, it seems like his relationship with the Way of the Leaf is and with the Tinkers is more complicated than he lets on or describes to Perrin and Egwene.
Yeah, well, even like the day that they're leaving, Ryan or whatever his name is, he comes out and he's just looking at the sky and then looking at Elias like, I think we're gonna leave too. Like they're clearly both experiencing something. They have a respect for each other, and I think even when we first meet the group, the Tuathain, or however you say it, that they say like Elias will always have a place. It's like, so he had a place before there. That's how I took it. That like he's a friend. He can leave, but he'll always be able to come back. Like that's kind of how I read that. Maybe that's wrong, but that's how I interpreted it. That like they have a mutual understanding of each other.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's also why he like immediately took Perrin and Egwene over to them. Yeah. It's like, I know that, I can keep you kids safe here.
Yeah, some part of him knows, even if he won't admit it, that it is that place of refuge. Any final thoughts on this chapter or the whole set of chapters?
So question though, when the previous chapter, they find the eye of Arthur, and then they're talking about like the statue. At first, I didn't understand what they were talking about. I thought that it was like they came upon a boulder that someone had like painted an eyeball on, and it was like symbolic. Were they talking about the giant statue that they made of him that had like fallen and broken? Because then they were talking about hiding in his hand. So is it like, it was like an actual like piece of face? That's what they were talking about.
Yep. Like they were standing around on the lid of a carved eyeball in the ground, and you could still
Okay.
sort of see it's mostly worn away, but you can kind of see the pupil in the middle, or the outline of the eye as like a big circle in stone circle in the grass.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because at first I was like, is this supposed to be symbolic? Like, what the hell is this? And
yeah.
then they describe how Perrin can kind of like see in the dark. And he realizes that he has more wolf powers. And so that's why he tells Egwene, like, oh, I felt it. Like, I could just innately tell, I can recognize what a giant rock hand feels like just from feeling it. So
I
that
glazed
part
over
was
that.
weird.
Huh.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I was wondering, is he sharing dreams with the wolves? There was something that was said that I was like, okay, so he's not having the dreams that he had with Rand and Matt. He's now having wolf dreams. So I think, like, I'm enjoying the Perrin chapters because we've kind of seen all of the other stuff play out, but it's not often that a character learns that they're like potentially part wolf or something.
Yeah. And I had almost completely forgotten, like I felt, speaking of the same morning for animal violence with Hopper, where Hopper like sort of leaps in to save them from the Whitecloaks and sort of sacrifices himself, telling Perrin and Egwene to run, and Perrin very vividly, vicariously experiences all of Hopper's sensations, including like as he's like tasting the blood that he's ripping out of Whitecloak throats, and as he's dying, like all the wounds being inflicted upon him. And it's sort of, that's like Perrin sort of goes berserk and then goes unconscious when something smashes him in the head. He's like completely given over to this attack alongside the wolves and feeling kind of one with them. And Hopper is the cub who we learned, we learned before he was named that because he watched eagles soar and he wanted so badly to be able to fly and to jump around, which is like a very cute reminder and a grisly death scene to be feeling a bit for this wolf that we've barely known.
Yeah, and I'm still, maybe I'm just like too excited hoping that this will happen, but so they say that Elias's eyes are yellow, and so I was wondering, like, are Perrin's eyes eventually going to become yellow, like the longer that he stays with the wolves? Because like I really, really want Elias to be a werewolf, and I don't think that's what it is, but I really want him to be a werewolf, so I was hoping that like the longer you spend with the wolves, if you have the ability to like talk to them and all that you can, like, you'll start to become them. But I did think it was interesting, going back to Bornhald, that he was saying, well, like, the wolves are bad because didn't you notice that some of the Trollocs have like wolf muzzles?
Yeah.
And so I'm also kind of hoping that this is like a Dr. Moreau thing, that like somehow wolves do have this crazy power, and that like previous bad guy had experimented to create the Trolloc, and maybe that's why the wolves...
like maybe they are made out of wolf brothers?
Yeah, and like maybe that's why the wolves don't like the Trollocs, like because they're like demonized, bastardized versions of them. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking for connections where there aren't any and missing the ones that there are. I don't know.
It seems really likely as a connection, especially given the Fellowship of the Rings thing and the whole Lord of the Rings things, where orcs are, well, they're given a couple different origins, but one of them is that the orcs are twisted elves, and that's why they hate elves so much, and that's why elves are repulsed by them, because the Dark Lord took elves and then took all their best features and twisted them into these creatures of shadow. So I don't know. I feel like you've had some very good and successful guesses and predictions so far. So I wouldn't write off your instincts on any of these. We'll find out. Next time, folks, we'll be reading chapters 31 to 35, where we'll learn what's become of Matt and Rand now that they've lost all their guardians and they're forced to fare against the dark on their own. Exciting news that I mentioned at the top of the podcast. Our first Patreon bonus episode is gone live by the time you're hearing this. If you want to hear us talk about Frank Herbert's Dune, David Lynch's Dune, and most of all, the brand new Denis Villeneuve Dune Part 1, subscribe to our Patreon at the $5 Tar Valen tier. It's a fun conversation you can be a part of as a thank you for your support. And it's the first of many similarly fun bonus-odes to come. Now, something else exciting will have happened by the time of our next episode. The first 2 episodes of the Wheel of Time TV show will have premiered on Amazon. It's already here. Holy cow, that date snuck up on us quickly. Depending on recording day logistics and whether we all get the chance to see it in time, maybe after the episode after the next one, where we talk about the TV show, which would be just about a short 2 weeks from now. This episode of WOTCast was produced by yours truly. You can find me at twitter.com/Caleb Wimble. Keely, where can people find you on the internet?
Instagram and Twitter at Keely_.
And remember, you can find us all at WOTCast.net if you forget any of those URLs. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at WOTCast Podcast. And another great way you can support the show is by leaving WOTCast a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. This really does help a lot. Number 2 way we find new listeners. The number 1 way, though, nothing comes close. Tell a friend about the show. Tweet about us. Share an episode that you really like. Maybe this episode on Facebook or on Instagram or anywhere else. Word of mouth means the world to us. That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening, folks. And remember, this is not the ending. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Time, but this is an ending. Farewell.